former victims of brutal apartheid system that humiliated us on daily basis, that took our dignity away, that invaded our country and continent and took everything that we used to say it belongs to us away, that did everything that we detested throughout our lives. But something very important you said, Muhammad, and that is what we went through over 300 years of colonial oppression in South Africa is like a Sunday school picnic to what the Palestinian people are going through every day in their own land.
You're watching The World from Below, and that was a clip from a protest against Israel's 2014 attack on Gaza at South Africa's Department of International Relations. We're speaking with Professor Peter Slezak. Supporters of the BDS campaign have referred to Israel as an apartheid state. Can you please explain a bit further the conditions which have led to this description?
Firstly, the occupation has been going on since 1967, but it's not just a geographical matter. Just on the geographical grounds, the Jordan Valley and about 60% of what's left of Palestine, which is the 22% of historical Palestine, that's about 60% of that has now been taken and essentially annexed as under exclusive Israeli control, and the Israeli government has said that they won't ever return that to the Palestinians. I mean, they don't want to return any of it, actually. Netanyahu's come out and said that there'll never be a Palestinian state under his command. So that's just the geographical side of it. But on the other side, on the other hand, there's also the fact that there's a wall that, on the other side, on the Israeli side, takes about 10% of the Palestinian land. So that's another huge proportion that has been effectively annexed. It goes through Palestinian olive groves. The farmers can't get to their own land and their olive trees and farms. And so that's just another geographical kind of annexation. So that the land has been gobbled up. There are little isolated cantons and bantustans. There are checkpoints all over the West Bank so that the Palestinian can't go from one part of his own land, one village to another, because of these checkpoints, where the Palestinians are humiliated and kept waiting for hours just to go to the doctor. An enormous number of women have had to give birth at the checkpoints, and the children have died at the checkpoints. I have to say one very important thing about this. Despite all the claims, it's always said that the occupation is about the security of Israel. It's nonsense. I'm willing to say categorically that there is nothing in the West Bank that is for the security of the state of Israel.
And can you elaborate on that a bit more?
The wall is not for the security of Israel. If they want a wall, nobody protests if they would have built the wall on the Green Line on the Israeli side. You want a wall, build a wall. But why does it have to go through? And of course it surrounds the settlements, which are, and of course every settler, as our own former foreign minister has now said very publicly, is contrary to international law. It's a violation of the Geneva Conventions. So every single settler, about 600,000 now, including a couple 100,000 in East Jerusalem, are in violation of international law. But there's a bit more if I could say, and this is, I'm trying to indicate why somebody might conceivably want to resort to non-violent protest against what is really a horror. The house demolitions are a very important part of the brutality of the occupation. Since 1967, I don't know whether it's 40,000 or more houses have been demolished. These are not punitive against terrorists. This is a kind of administrative, under some regulations, that they decide that somebody hasn't got a permit. And of course, Palestinians can't get permits to build on their own land, to extend their houses or to build. And so they build in violation of the Israeli regulations, military regulations. They're under military law in the West Bank, not civil law. And they build, and of course then they get a notice that they have to demolish their house. They have to then pay for the demolition, the tractors that come and knock the place down. They then charge for it, or they have the option of demolishing it themselves. This is the humiliating and brutal way of behaving. And they come in the middle of the night. I mean, almost always they'll come in, in the middle of the night, wake up the family. There's children screaming, women fainting. It's just the most horrible brutality. And this is, happening on an enormous scale. An enormous number of houses are under the threat of demolition because this is the way they do it. Now, of course, then they're evicting Palestinians from the South Hebron Hills, these pathetic villages that have been evicted from their houses, now living in tents. They come in and now threatening in Susia and little places where I visited. They demolished their water cisterns. Now, explain to me why the demolition of water cisterns in the South Hebron Hills is the defence, the security of Israel.
And can you elaborate on that a bit more?
The water is another very important point. There's a water aquifer which is on Palestinian land. 70% of the water of the Palestinians is diverted into Israel. Some 10% of the water goes to the settlements, and the Palestinians get hardly enough, in fact, less than the United Nations, declared minimum amount of water. Now, what has that got to do with the security of the state of Israel? The picture starts to become pretty clear. Now, one other fact that I ought to mention in terms of this, or two others, something like 1 million trees have been uprooted and destroyed by the settlers or the army, and this is just appalling violence and assault on the Palestinians who have tended these trees sometimes for hundreds of years. The other thing to say is that the deaths, the shootings of unarmed demonstrators in their own villages. Something, since 1967, something in the order of 8,000 Palestinians who are unarmed demonstrators in their own villages have been shot dead, and among those it's something around 1,400 or 1,500 children. Now, recently there was a video, a security camera, that showed two kids walking along with their backpack, doing nothing of concern, and they were shot dead by Israeli army snipers. Now, this is not in the news. Now, you may then ask yourself, okay, there may be reasons why boycott's not a good idea, but the idea that people might want to boycott and do something non-violent, and it has to be said that when the Palestinians were resorting to violence, which I condemn, and most people I know will, the suicide bombings, which were pretty awful by any standard, it's not a question of that. When the Palestinians resort now to non-violent means, now they're called Nazis, and everybody who supports them are called anti-Semitic. This is just appalling, and I think Jews among all should resist this kind of slur, even if they don't agree with the boycott movement.
And that's all we have time for in this week's episode of The World from Below. I'd like to thank our guest Peter Slezak. I'd also like to thank our crew and all our producers and our host at RMI TV. You've been watching The World from Below. Thanks for joining us.